For those just joining, we are now recording the session.
So I think we have hit just after 2. We've got 46 people, which seems a good number. So welcome, everybody. I'm sure we'll have more people joining as I talk. And I would like to introduce Bob Lloyd, who is the Vice President for Improvement Science and Methods, and is also one of the senior lecturers at the Institute for Health Improvement. And I think I've had quite a few lectures from Bob and discussions. And what I've really appreciated is there's an incredible skill and understanding of the maths behind everything and the data for improvement, but also a phenomenal ability to make that accessible to everyone to understand as well. So welcome, Bob, and we will hand over to yourself.
All right. Well, thank you. Thank you very much, Ruth and Tim, for organizing this session today, and welcome everyone. Thank you for taking time out of your busy schedules to join us today to think a little bit more about better quality through better measurement. And basically, this is a program that will help you with statistical thinking. You don't need your calculator, you don't need to worry about calculating a standard deviation or a coefficient of correlation. It's all about statistical thinking. And this has been a primary goal of what we do at IHI to help people think through measurement and statistics. There's plenty of people who understand the theory and the math behind statistical theory. What you need to be able to do is use statistical thinking to improve patient care and processes that you're working on. And I think this quote from H.G. Wells, the famous writer, is actually spot on. It parallels very closely what Dr. W. Edwards Deming, one of the founding thinkers of modern industrial quality control, always said in his seminars. I had the pleasure of being in 4 Deming seminars before he passed away at the ripe old age of 93, and he was still teaching 4-day seminars at that age. And his whole theme was about statistical thinking, getting people to use data to create information. Data are not information. Data are just the bits and bytes of things that we collect in the course of day, whether it be administration, operational, and statistical thinking is how you turn data into information for sound decision making. So as you think about improvement, it's incumbent to think about where measurement fits into the journey. And it is not all about data. Some people think if we get more data, we're bound to improve. Well, healthcare suffers from a preponderance of data. And so I made this little flow chart to show you where the measurement steps fit into the overall improvement journey. So the yellow boxes are things you need to do with your team as you plan an improvement journey. The blue boxes are where measurement pops in to the story and to the journey. And so you can see it starts by identifying an opportunity, you work along, get a team together, and then you see this first key question: is the process standardized? If it's not standardized sufficiently that you have essentially one process, then in fact, you need to work to standardize it or to parse it out into its segments. Do you do the same thing weekdays as you do weekends? Day shift, afternoon, night shift? If you've got different processes for dealing with different stratification levels, then in fact, you don't have one process. You've got multiple, and you're going to have a team working on day shift care management, afternoon, night shift, weekends, weekdays, holidays. They all differ. So it's always fascinating when somebody goes, well, we have a bed assignment issue. People come into the A&E, they need to get a bed put into an inpatient ward. How do we do that? Well, my first question is, do you do it the same all the time? If you go, oh, no, we don't do it all this. I mean, it is really different here on blah, 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 blah. You've got to standardize it because you can't fix one part of it at the expense of another. So once you've got a process that's reasonably standardized, now the blue boxes kick in. And this is what we're going to talk about today. Notice that as you work through this other diamond, our special causes present, we'll talk about that. Then you identify change opportunities, and then you move to the second part of this, where you see this is where you pick up the PDSA cycles. You have specific idea that you think is going to make a difference. Then you collect more data. Did the ideas that you had about improvement actually make a difference? If not, boom, you go back, you modify, and you're going to stay in this loop for a while as you run PDSAs to find which idea is most efficacious, is most efficient, most effective, and works to actually make the process function in a better way. After you answer this question successfully, did the ideas have the desired effect? Boom. Then you're ready to implement it and make it part of the new way of working. No going back to the old way. You continue to monitor to make sure it doesn't drift back to its old ways. This is where quality control comes into place. And then you disseminate it. Maybe you write it up, you share it. Maybe you change policies, education, procedures, and then you look for something else to work on. So as we think about this sequence, we come back to the IHI model for improvement. That is, we've got the 3 questions, and now we see that we have an aim, we have measures, the second question, and the third question, what changes? That's all wrapped up with the PDSA cycle, and collectively, these components create the IHI model for improvement. Now, if you're not familiar with our model for improvement, Tim and Ruth and the team can certainly give you a good tutorial on our approach and our model for improvement. There are other models. They all have merit. Lean, Six Sigma, ISO, the Baldrige Award, the International Quality Award. Groups use many different things. We have worked in the NHS in all 4 countries for over 30 years now. I've had the pleasure of working with the NHS and many trusts throughout the 4 countries for now over 20 years. And as we have helped organizations, we use this model and framework. And it is one that you'll hear people talk about. And also, it is one that you're using at the Cambridge University Hospital system. So if you have any questions, please see Ruth and Tim. They'll gladly help you gain more knowledge. So Dr. Deming, as I mentioned earlier, is really one of the founding thinkers about what is called statistical process control, SPC methods. His teacher was Dr. Walter Schuhart, who actually is the fellow who created all of this at Western Electric, which became Bell Labs, AT&T. They literally wrote the books on statistical process control methods going back to the early 1920s. And what we've done at IHI is to adapt what most manufacturing companies today use. Also agriculture, mining, the military, all use these quality control principles to improve quality in its components, safety, customer engagement, efficiency, effectiveness. And Deming, I think, would have been great on Twitter because he was wonderful at one-liners in his seminars. And he said things like this. Oh, not sure what happened there. Hey, for some reason, now the animations have stopped. Let me try that again. Not really sure why. Well, this slide, if it worked, had a number of quotes from Deming. And one of them that I particularly like, he said, without data, you're just a person with another opinion. And so as we think about data, it becomes incumbent on us to think about how we actually use data on a regular basis. So quick little test. We're looking at wait time for a test to see a procedure, see the physician, whatever. You see before and after. You see the change made. The average beforehand was 70-minute wait. The average afterward was 35. So there's the target of 30. Now, what do you conclude? Is this good data or bad data? Would you celebrate this? People would say, well, it was higher before, it's lower after. We're still not at target. What do you conclude about this? So loosen up your fingers and type into the chat. What would you do with this? Would you celebrate? Would you write this up? What would you conclude if somebody showed this in a meeting? Before and after. They could even give you a p-value and say, well, you know, it's significant at the 0.05 level of statistical significance. What would you conclude? Okay, we've got one comment. Thank you very much. It's good progress. It's insufficient to make conclusions, too few data points. Thank you, Francis. Any other thoughts? Because we do this all the time. Healthcare loves before and after, comparing last quarter to this quarter, last year's average to this average. Don't know. What was the change? Good questions. So as we look at the data, this only represents one unit. So we have the change, the target, and now we've got 3 units. Each unit has an average of 70 before, exactly like the bar graphs, and afterwards an average of 35. You can see the change right in the middle. So only one of these units actually demonstrates change against the bar graphs. Is it unit 1, 2, or 3? Put on your statistical thinking hats. Only one of these units demonstrates and reinforces the bar graphs. Which one? Unit 1, 2, or 3? 1, okay, 2. Figure, even if you just guess, you have a 1/3 chance of being right. That's not bad probability. Unit 2, Unit 2. So a lot of people pick Unit 2. What's the problem with Unit 2? It was changing and getting better. But the change did not have an impact because something else extraneous to the system was actually causing the change. And it did get better, but it's not due to the change. Unit 3 was up, it dropped, but then what happened to Unit 3? It didn't have quality control principles, and you see it started drifting back. Unit 1 is the only unit that actually confirms the bar graphs. And so what we try to do is move away from aggregated static data displays like bar graphs, pie charts, before, after, and look at data over time. Time series analysis lies at the heart and soul of what quality improvement's about. So I have 6 little questions and issues for you to think about today. We're going to work through each one of these. You can then follow up with Tim, Ruth, Debbie, and the quality team to explore these further as they relate to your own work. So the first question is, what is your current level of knowledge about quality measurement? And so I've put together this little assessment tool and instructions. There are a number of issues which are the key milestones in the quality measurement journey, and I stress quality measurement, and we'll talk about different types of measurement in a moment. But it's very simple. There are no right and wrong answers. And we're not going to write this up and send it to the BBC for publishing. It's going to be you thinking about what you know and don't know so we can help you fill the gap between what you know and don't know. And you see at the bottom, excuse me, there are 5 response options. If you mark a 1, this is the 1-800 call the quality improvement team. And if you mark a 5, give me a call because I'll invite you to teach statistics with me at the IHI forums. But there are no right and wrong answers again. It's just getting you to think about what you know, because you've all taken some course in statistics at some point. A lot of that statistical training, however, is in the area of what we call enumerative statistics, inferential, descriptive, it goes by different names. What quality improvement statistics is all about is analytic statistics, and we'll pick this up in a moment. The second question is, what's your motivation for measuring? And this question highlights several things, but basically it all depends on your perspective. And there are a variety of perspectives that I'd like to share with you. First of all, George Box, who is one of the world's best known statisticians, coined this statement years ago, and you'll see it pop up in different quarters. You can see the preface, but the bottom line is all models are wrong and some models are useful. Box was known for this in his classes that he taught at the University of Wisconsin, and it has become a mantra in statistical literature and thinking. So as we work through this, I want to show you several perspectives. The first one was written up by some colleagues at the Institute for Clinical Systems Improvement, ICSI, in Minneapolis back in 1997. And notice what they wrote in this little overview to their article, The Three Faces of Performance Measurement. They basically said there are three approaches to measurement, and they are counterproductive to even try to blend them. In my writings and teachings, I respect what they did originally because they got people thinking about measurement in healthcare. They're actually not correct. So I made this table based on their approach. They said there were three approaches: improvement, measurement, accountability or judgment measurement, and then research. Now, if you look at how these things lay out, look at the aim. The aim of improvement is efficiency and effectiveness. The aim for judgment or accountability is just that. They want to rate and rank organizations, doctor groups, hospitals, clinics, trusts, boards, and just say who's better, who's worse. Have you killed fewer people than the last time we looked at you? Do you have less error? And you go, but we're a big teaching hub. I don't care. Here's where you rank. And they love doing things like those RAG reports, which are the bane of my existence. And we'll talk more about that as well. Star ratings, diamond ratings, rating and rankings, deciles, quartiles. There is a very simple approach there. Are you better now than the last time we looked at you? With no caveats. Research, on the other hand, is designed around efficacy. Is this an efficacious drug treatment or procedure, given the etiology of the problem, what we know about it, and what's been shown in the literature? Efficacy, efficiency, effectiveness, judgment. The second thing I'd highlight is the hypothesis. For quality improvement, we have flexible hypotheses that we keep changing based on our theory and what we've learned from our data. The folks in the middle, they have no hypothesis. Their hypothesis is basically, are you better or worse than the last time we looked at you? Which is pretty a weak hypothesis, actually. And over in the research column, this is where we have our good old friend, the null hypothesis, that once you set the null hypothesis, whether you're doing an article or research, RCT, experimental, quasi-experimental design, you never change that puppy. You will live and die on your research with the null hypothesis. In quality improvement, we don't use the null hypothesis approach because we keep changing our theory based on new knowledge. The final thing that I'd highlight is the analytic methods. As I said, in quality improvement, we use statistical process control methods: run chart, control chart, planned experimentation, time series, interrupted time series, all types of different time-based analyses. The people in the middle, in judgment land, they have no change focus. They come and look at you, make assessments, whether it's the Joint Commission International, the CQC, whatever the group is, the press. They look at you and go, you're not doing as well as the other people. And you go, well, are you going to help us? And they go, no, we're not going to send people to help you get better, but we'll come back in 6 months and look at you and rate and rank you again. So over in the research column, we use enumerative statistics. This is where F values, t-test, correlation, regression, time series, discriminant, cluster, all types of things, including the beloved p-value live. So these three columns are fundamentally taking different approaches to measurement. And as you think about this, it goes back to the article that our colleagues at ICSE wrote, and they basically said that these three methods are like silos, and they are so distinct and different, you can't combine them. This is where I think they're wrong. To me, data are like a Rubik's Cube. And so I could take the same data and do research, provide data to the board, senior management on judgment, and I could do it for improvement. So let's say that the nurses are looking at patient falls on an inpatient ward, and they're plotting the number of falls by day, stratified by harm with injury for a fall, no harm. And now we're being asked to go to the board. I could take that data, flip it around, and just aggregate it and go to the board and say, we have looked at the data and we are better now than we were the last time. We have fewer falls now than we did before. That's all they want to know. They don't even care to know the number. They just want to know, are we better? And because I am groomed in the research category, as an academic, I could say, that's interesting, work with the nurses and say, now let's set up an experimental design, possibly an RCT, or at least a quasi-experimental design, and do a planned experiment to determine if this new thing that you have come up with will in fact make a difference. I'm going to use the same data just by flipping it around and being able to ask different questions. We have an inordinate amount of wasted time in healthcare because people in each one of these sectors collect data independently. It's a huge waste of time. And when we get people to think about improvement, they say, well, we don't have enough time to do improvement. Well, it's because we waste a great deal of time administratively and also with data collection. So think about how you can integrate the data and start blending these different approaches. The second approach is something I actually developed for the NHS, which has now become quite ubiquitous as we work with organizations around the world. That is thinking about the quality funnel. There's quality control, there's quality assurance, and there's quality improvement. Now, all three of these have value. The issue is, when do you do them? Unfortunately, in healthcare, quality assurance seems to be a starting point. You shouldn't be doing quality assurance unless you have a high degree of quality control where performance is complying with specifications, targets, or goals. If you find that your performance is slipping, then you do quality improvement. At some point, when you have a stable, predictable process that's capable of achieving your targets and goals through improvement and quality control, then you can do quality assurance, doing point prevalence audits to find out how the process is working. Unfortunately, quality assurance has been a dominant approach in healthcare before quality improvement and quality control ever were in place. Laboratory work is one of the few areas that has strong quality control because they're doing lab tests, time tests, all types of things. In my 45 years plus of working in healthcare administration before joining IHI, when I first worked as a chief quality officer for a very large, one of the largest health systems in America here in Chicago, where I live, they didn't have a quality improvement department until I created one. They had quality assurance, they had risk management, which were all after the fact. Risk management is all about lawsuits, malpractice, but it's looking backwards. And quality assurance, they write policies and procedures, they really don't assure anything. It's not until you start looking at things on a day-to-day basis through quality improvement and quality control. So all of these have value. Matter of fact, manufacturing, this little Logitech mouse, I've had this little thing for 27 years. I've dropped it, it's popped apart, I've glued it back together. It is a marvelous little gadget. Well, they designed this, they built a prototype, and then they didn't make 5 million of them. They tested them, tested under different conditions, ran PDSAs, and then when they had a high degree of confidence that the processes they had were capable of producing this little gizmo, with 0 defects, then as they were making them on the line, they would pull maybe every 200th mouse, rip it apart, see how it performs to spec. And if it wasn't performing to specification, quality control was slipping. Then they would do quality improvement and not go back to quality assurance until they knew this thing had a high degree of reliability. That's what we're trying to achieve in healthcare and quality improvement. All 3 bubbles have value, but they need to be done in the right sequence. The final one comes from Walter Schuhart, Deming and Juran's teacher. The old way, quality assurance, accountability, judgment, is that people would prescribe targets, goals, and specifications. And if everything was to the left of this target, this vertical black line, no action was taken. And it didn't matter if you were right by the line or way in this left side tail. Why? Because you were at least better than target. And anything that didn't fit, like the red tail here, they would reject the defects. Matter of fact, workers have been fired at General Electric because they didn't meet specification for target and goal. The problem is that when you have a distribution, they're like pollywogs. Pollywog loses its tail, it grows a new one. Well, so do distributions. They reset themselves and you get a new tail. This is the mistake Jack Welch made at GE. He put all employees into 3 categories, A, B, or C workers. A's got the bonus and promotions. B's were held in abeyance until they saw which way they went, and they fired the C's. The problem was that the B's became the C's. Some of the A's drifted because the distribution reset itself. So what Schuhart said is that anytime you have a distribution of work, anything, you need to think about all that you do. And you have 2 options. If you don't like the outcome, you can either take steps to merely reduce the variation, but keep the process basically the same, little work around the edges, or if the process is so far from target, you need to put it out of its misery, totally redesign and shift the whole process in a new direction. That's either quality improvement or quality redesign. And this is what manufacturing does regularly. We rarely do this in healthcare. So think about this. The processes you're working on merely need to have reduced variation. The mean could stay the same, but the min and the max need to be compressed. Or do you fundamentally need to change the work to achieve the target or goal? That is the fundamental question for improvement. So at the end of each one of these sections, I give you a few concluding remarks for you just to think about as you start applying this stuff to your own work. Just for a few wrap-up comments on this section. If you are hung up on p-values, then I strongly recommend this book. It is marvelous. These 2 authors have been vilified by some academics, particularly people who love the p-value and randomized control trials. They have shown, as you can see from this title, how the standard error costs us jobs, justice, and lives. They have gone through almost every industry, including healthcare, and pointed out how the beloved p-value with randomized control trials has actually killed people. And it's happened in every country of the world that focuses on RCTs, p-values, and traditional research. Now, I'm not saying that traditional research has no value, but this is where I cut my teeth and learned about statistics, doing RCTs and building research, experimental, quasi-experimental designs, which I teach at Harvard and other places now. This has value. Don't think I'm saying it doesn't, but it's in the context. So notice what they wrote. It shows how wide the disaster is. Matter of fact, there are statistical groups in the United States now that have said we no longer are going to endorse using the p-value. Most people don't even know where the p-value came from. I'll just plant that as a thought to think about. It came from a statistician in Ireland, actually, and I'll leave you to figure out who it was. So as you think about research, many of you have probably been acquainted with or experienced traditional research, experimental, quasi-experimental designs, And we typically use the p-value, whether it's chi-square, f-test, r-values, whatever, to say, is there a difference between these two things? The problem is that quality improvement is not about comparing things pre-post. It's about what's happening right now to our patients, to our workers, to ourselves. And that takes a different approach. That different approach has been grounded in this book, which not only has one of the longest titles I have in my library, but it's a marvelous read. Look at the title of this book. Sharon McGraney has spent 8 years writing this book, doing the research, and it's all based on Bayesian statistics. Now, if any of you have had courses in Bayesian statistics, stick up your paw or put a note in the chat that you have, in fact, taken Bayesian statistics, because it is a very legitimate branch of statistics that essentially serves as the foundation for quality improvement. Notice a couple of these quotes. If you're not thinking of like a Bayesian, perhaps you should. And John Maynard Keynes, a famous economist, when facts change, I change my opinion. What do you do? And that lies at the heart and soul of the model for improvement and quality improvement. And so Bayes was an Anglican minister and also one, at that time, one of the world's best known statisticians. Bayesian theorem is shown in this box. It basically is updating your assumptions, your theories, your premises of your research proposal as you gain new knowledge. And that's what quality improvement is all about. There's a wonderful story. Some of you may be familiar with this. Anyone know who this individual is? If you do, type it into the chat. It's an Englishman, Alan Turing. Very good. Thank you. Very well. And marvelous movie, The Imitation Game, based on Turing and the work of individuals at a particular location. And that you knew Turing right away, which I would expect, given that we're based in England here today. Where did they do their work? That's the next trivia question. This is like a pub quest. Great. Thank you, Richard. Bletchley Park. Exactly. Now, what did Turing do? Turing gets a lot of credit, but he actually didn't figure all this stuff out. Turing created the Turing machine, which was the precursor to modern day computers. And it was a series of wheels, cogs, etc., that allowed probabilities to be calculated and thought through. Now, the Enigma code was what the Nazis had. And if you're familiar with that story, they changed the code every day. Every 24 hours, these folks had to figure out running multiple PDSAs to try to break the code. And the people who did that used Turing's machine, but it wasn't Turing. It was the code breaking team at Bletchley Park led by these 3 women, and it was all women. And I think it's unfortunate that Turing gets the credit, but it was the women at Bletchley Park that actually busted the code. And their marvelous book, The Women Code Breakers, led primarily by Joan Clark, the woman in the middle here, that, as you can see from the pictures, were primarily all women. Turing did the machine, the women figured out the theory. And it was all predicated on Bayesian theories because they had with every 24 hours to change their hypothesis. If they'd have used the null hypothesis, we'd all be now under German control. It is just that simple. It was Bayesian statistics that allowed them to think through. And that's the underlying premise of quality improvement, to change your theory and your hypothesis as you get more data. We're going to run a test this afternoon. What did we learn? Now, should we change our idea that we think will make the process better tomorrow? We change the process based on our theory and our hypothesis and the data we collect. So as you think about this, I'd ask you to think about what is motivating you in your work. Is it data for improvement, data for judgment, or data for research? Now, let me just go back to that for a moment, because as I've done seminars with 500,000 people, and I'd say, how many of you spend 80% of your time setting up and running double-blinded randomized clinical trials? And out of an audience of say 500, I might get 8 people. Because the majority of people are in that second column. They're being held accountable, or they're being asked to judge something, or improvement. Actually, there's a very small number of people who spend their life in healthcare setting up and running double-blinded randomized trials with a null hypothesis and p-values. It's valuable, important, and critical to our learning. It's about efficacy. And what we do for quality improvement is take ideas that have been shown to be efficacious and then ask, how can we efficiently and effectively put them in place hour by hour, day by day? That's not what a p-value does. They work hand in glove. And so I'd ask you to think seriously about where you spend your time, what is driving data collection at Cambridge, and how can we blend these things in a better Rubik's Cube? Now, that leads us to the third question of, do you know the milestones in the quality measurement journey? These are the milestones. And to help you think that through, I've provided you a case study. It's looking at CAUTI, catheter-associated urinary tract infections, and a couple colleagues and I wrote this to show all the milestones in the quality measurement journey. So what it does is it walks you through and says, here's the CAUTI case study, here's the background, here's the issue, this is why it's important. And then for each of those sections, we give you a box and says, well, if the CAUTI team did this, what are you doing for your project? And then each section says, here's the CAUTI measures. What are your measures? Here's the CAUTI PDSA. Here's the CAUTI driver diagram. Here's the CAUTI run and control charts. What are yours? And so as we work through this, we lay out ways for you to think about your project. So here's the aim for CAUTI. It was a 2-level aim to reduce below 1.6 within 12 months, and then a Foley catheter rate to 0 within 12 months. So the question, as you look at this, they give a good aim statement based on our criteria, how good you want to be and by when, but does it seem reasonable? What do you think? Is this too ambitious to be below 1.6 CAUTIs per 1,000 Foley days and then to 0 within 12 months? Is that too ambitious? Not ambitious enough? We have the system, we have the goal, and we have the time frame. So what do you think? Well, let's look at the data. It all starts with data. Remember, without data, you're just a person with another opinion. So the first thing I'd say is show me the data. So here's their CAUTI rate, so many CAUTIs per 1,000 Foley days. We have the average, 3.5 per 1,000 Foley days. Here's that first target. They want everything to be below 1.6. Oh, sure, there's a few dots below 1.6, but look where the majority of them are. They're above. And then here is the second goal, to be at 0. They want no CAUTIs. Now, you tell me and get ready to type in, given this data, what do you conclude about the CAUTI aim? Does the process need variation reduced? Keep the process the same, just maybe reduce that upper control limit, reduce the average a little bit. Or does it fundamentally need redesign? What do you think? Is the current process capable of achieving both the short and long range goals? Yes or no? Fundamental redesign, okay. So when I work with teams, and I do this with senior management boards, I've even done this with the CQC. I've run seminars for the CQC in London, which was really a lot of fun. But as we look at this data, I can tell you within seconds, this process has no capability of achieving either the first or second target or goal, period. So if I was presenting, I'd say to the quality committee or the board, here's our data on CAUTI. We've looked at it. It has an upper control limit around 10 CAUTIs per 1,000, lower control limit potentially at 0. The average currently is 3.5, and you can see our 2 goals. This process has no capability of ever achieving target 1 or 2 and I'd sit down. Don't waste words. The chart will show you very quickly that this process is not capable. I've done this for diabetic patients, blood pressure, individual patients that I've made charts for their performance. I've done this for systems, for wait time, for the 4-hour A&E wait, which most people are not capable of achieving. And so at a glance, people spend entirely too, and then we'll go, oh, but you see, we had 4 dots below the 1.6, and well, don't ignore that stuff on the far right. That was during COVID and things weren't good. They go through all of this when in fact it's a simple statement. This process under current operating conditions has no chance of ever achieving target 1 or 2. Boom, sit down. That's it. And we can tell that because we don't have time 1, time 2. We don't have a p-value. We have data over time. This is like hooking up the process to an EKG. Think of the patient in the ICU. We are hooking them up to telemetry and we're getting vitals moment by moment. Why? Because the criticality of their process demands that we understand their performance. Think about that regarding all your other activities. Does the process need to be hooked up to EKG to understand the performance? And if you're in a quality improvement mode, the answer is yes. So we start with an aim statement, very simple. It's not a doctoral dissertation. What's the topic? Why is it important? What are you going to do about it? How good do you want to be and by when? But you cannot make that determination unless you have data. Writing an aim statement without data is a fool's folly. It has aspirations, it has desires, but it has no grounding in reality. Once you have an aim statement, then we can move to concept and building our measures. Here's what it would look like. Now, the 2 blue lines at the top are in what I call concept land. They are not measures. The aim, reduce inpatient harm by 37%. Is that a measure? No, it's a desired end state. It's a goal. It's a vision. And I say, I need something more specific to have measurement. And somebody says, well, we need to reduce inpatient falls. Is reducing inpatient falls a measure? No, it's not. It's a concept. It's not until you breach that red line and move into the gray words that you are actually in what I call measurement land. And so as you think about your work, how many of you basically live in concept land? And how many of you actually start working in measurement land? These are things I've collected. I did not make these up. Some of these have come from my work with the NHS, others from the Mideast, the Far East, from Africa, from Australia, from the US. These are not measures. They have importance in a value statement, possibly. It's a desired end state, but it's concept land. They are not measures. And what you need to be able to do is move out of concept land and into measurement land. The problem is that every concept can have many measures. So on the left, we have concepts. On the right, we have potential measures. Remember that a measure is a quantifiable thing, a count, a score, an index, a percent, a rate, days between adverse events, time between adverse events. It is quantifiable. And when you state measures, you do not state desired direction. For example, a good measure wouldn't say, reduce the percent of patients who fell once or more. No, you want it objective. All adverbs, adjectives, those live over in concept land. When you get down to measures, they are quantifiable, objective things without valence and directionality. The issue is that there are many, many different types of measures. There are no universal measures. And so you need to start thinking seriously about your project and your teams. And this again is where Debbie, Ruth, Tim, the quality team can help you because they are experts in helping people think this through. We have identified 3 different categories of measures: outcome, process, and balancing. Now, most people get what an outcome measure is. If you're into research, it's the dependent variable. Process measures are things that are essentially independent or control measures, and balancing measures are one that people oftentimes don't think a whole lot about. Balancing measures are ways to make sure that the work that you're doing in your patch is not making something in the next department, unit, or patch worse. I could improve something in my area, but I have tea with Ruth and she goes, you know, that new thing that you're doing over in your department, it is actually making things worse in mine. Now, if I'm thinking systems thinking, I go, oh, gee, I'm sorry, Ruth. We hadn't even thought of that. But if I'm so into my own space, I go, yeah, well, that's tough. Good luck, Ruth. Fix it. Balancing measures help us make sure that we're not demoralizing or affecting the system in a negative way. And so while you must have outcome and process measures, balancing measures, particularly if you have a complex issue like A&E time, transfer to a unit from the A&E, you better have some balancing measures because it's a very complex interwoven process that has confounding factors. All right. So 3 types of measures. Here's what they look like. We're looking at a family practice clinic. On the left, my overall aim, improve waiting time and patient satisfaction. I have 2 outcome measures related to this. I have 4 process measures. I have 3 balancing measures. Now, think about this. What if the volume of patients goes down at the clinic? What would you hypothesize would happen to length of wait time in the clinic? Volume of patients coming to clinic goes down. What happens to length of stay and wait time? Does it go up or down? Type into the chat. What do you think? Volume of patients coming to clinic goes down. What happens to wait time? Exactly. Our theory would be that it's reduced. It would go down. What about patient satisfaction? Fewer people coming to clinic. We see wait time go down. What happens to patient satisfaction? It could potentially what? Go up. Fewer people, I get seen faster. I'm a happy camper. Now, what if you do something to improve wait time? It goes down, patient satisfaction goes up, but staff satisfaction, they come, Tim and I work there and we say, you know, this is all well and good. The patients are happier, but I can tell you staff have had it. And if it continues, we're going to lose some people. Time has gone down, patient satisfaction up, but staff satisfaction gone down. What have you gained? You've sub-optimized the system, improved one area, but jeopardized another. So as you think about your measures, you've got to constantly think about balancing measures. And these are typically the types of categories we use for balancing measures. Okay? Margaret Wheatley is a wonderful writer on the human condition. If you've not read her work, I'd strongly recommend it. And I love this quote. Just, it captures beautifully what balancing measures are all about. Now, as you have thought about these things, I've put together worksheets for you. Some of you may not be working on a project, or you may be part of a team. Whatever, you can talk to, again, our quality colleagues, and they'll help you work this through. So I've given you these worksheets, a little organizational instruction. It's simple. Don't make this more complicated than it is. The worksheet has some simple columns. If you fill it in, it looks like this. My concept, patient harm. I have 2 measures, inpatient fall rate, number of falls. Those are both outcome. I have 2 process measures and 1 balancing. It's just this simple, but it requires this machine, not this keyboard in front of me. You've got to think about what you're doing, why it's important, and what are the best metrics to demonstrate why we need to work on this. All right? Once you've done this, now you need to deal with the fun topic, operational definitions. Now, this is, if you will, the operational definition of an operational definition. These are the characteristics that a good op def should have, and depends on the type of measure. So third point, specification method. If you're doing wait time in a doctor's office or radiology or wherever, all you need to do is specify the measurement method and equipment. Are we using the watch on my wrist, the clock on the wall, the timestamp on the computer? Did we give the patient a card that they keep track of the time as they go through the various stages? Now, if I have a percent, however, I need criteria because a percentage is a binomial. You're alive, you're dead. The chart was there, it's missing. You're on time, you're not on time. It's only a binomial, there's two options. And in that case, you need criteria. This is a good history and physical report. Well, how would I know? Well, it should have correct patient, correct date, time, initial diagnosis, any prior admissions. Criteria. So depending on the type of measure, you end up either having specification for measurement, criteria. And as you do that, it allows you to think through, what do we mean by these things? Look at these terms. We're very vague with our language. What would you say is the answer to some of these things? I had somebody in class one time. I said, what is a good vacation? This guy pops his hand up right away. I said, oh yeah, what is it? He goes, it's when my boss is on vacation. Not what I expected, but it was a good operational definition. So here's one simple little cartoon. What do we mean by going wireless? And they look at each other and I don't think it was a good idea to go wireless. Every day you see things. I love this. This is from the federal government in the United States that always has marvelous examples of confusion. This is the definition of a container. Now take a deep breath and see if you can read this. It's all one sentence. That is the way the government defines a container for health care purposes. I'm not really sure what a container is after reading that. Now, here's another one. You're all familiar with global warming and global temperature. I heard this on the news one evening and I got curious and I said, what in the world is global temperature? Well, here's global temperature. This is how global temperature is measured. It's a fascinating thing. Take a moment and look at this. I've read this many times. I'm still not sure what it's telling me. And so as you read this, are you going to be able to explain to your friends and family now what global temperature is? It's right there in black and white, laid out in excruciating detail. But what does it mean? I'll end my examples with one that's personal. My wife and I played a sport that all of you are familiar with. People in the US wonder what we're doing when we play this game. Field hockey, otherwise known as hockey in other countries. My wife was captain of her university team, had US Olympic tryouts for the national team. I picked up the sport because I loved her and because I just fell in love with the sport. It is a fascinating sport. My wife, unfortunately, blew her ACL out back in the mid-'80s when she was playing internationally. And we played club hockey after that, but she then became one of the top women's officials for women's field hockey in the United States and was doing the collegiate championship game between two teams. Women's hockey ends in November, and November gets a little chilly in the United States. This is in Iowa, middle of the country. The ball, as you probably know, is hard molded plastic. You drop it, it doesn't bounce, but you hit it with a stick, goes very fast and hurts when it hits. And so ball gets hit. It's a cold day. The ball breaks in half. Half the ball goes in the cage, half stays out on the pitch. So the question is it a goal? What do you think? Tie game, national championship, half the ball's in the cage, half out on the pitch. Is it a goal or not a goal? What do you think? Now, I know somebody's going to say, yeah, you get a half a point. Nah, that wasn't it. It's either a goal. Thank you. Yeah, a half a goal. I like that. Good thinking. So they all come to the center of the field. My wife is looking at the rule book. She's the lead official. The coaches, the national collegiate people are there, press. And finally, my wife goes, I have it. No goal. Because in the rule book, it says the entire ball must pass the plane of the goal line. Now, I've been in matches. If you know hockey, the goal line is quite wide because of all the pads on the goalie. I've seen balls on the goal line, which creates a great deal of chaos. The ball must be in the cage. So we're driving home, and I say to her, let me ask you this. What if the ball gets hit, it breaks in half, and both halves go into the cage? The entire ball technically is in the cage. Isn't that a goal? I was so proud of myself. She looked over at me and said, I'm not even going to talk to you. So every day you'll see these options for thinking about operational definitions. These are things that I've picked up in my travels. Some of these are from the NHS. For example, adding life to years and years to life. That was a NHS tagline a number of years ago. I have no idea what that means. Here's another one from the NHS, moving services closer to home. Are we going to move your house? Are we going to put the team in a van and move them over to your place? What does that mean? What are breakthrough priorities? When does surgery start? Delayed discharges. Well, look at medication errors. Here's a worksheet, percent medication errors. Number of outpatient, I thought we were talking about inpatient. No, outpatient. Number of outpatient medicated orders with one or more errors. Is that clear? No, because we still haven't defined an error. An error is defined as wrong med, wrong dose, wrong route, or wrong patient. We have the denominator, then we can move to data collection. The issue is that operational definitions are not universal truths. They're merely ways to define a concept, a measure that allows the team to get on with its work. You'll always have people debate, question, challenge operational definitions, but you need to get consensus with your team so that we can get on with the next step. So I've put together a worksheet for you. Each one of your measures should have this defined. The measure name, percent of patients that received wound information at time of discharge. What's included, what's excluded, when does it start, when does it end? And then that allows you to move on to start collecting data, which is the next milestone in the journey. So how many of you have had formal coursework in these topics? Anybody, particularly sampling? Has anybody had a formal course just on sampling methods? If you have, talk to the quality folks because they could benefit from having you part of their team. My experience in doing this for many, many years in healthcare is that most healthcare people have never had proper training in sampling methodology. I'll get back to that in a moment. Let's start with stratification. It's not a statistical issue. It's a conceptual knowledge, logic issue. It's separating the data into relevant categories based on the knowledge of subject matter experts who can tell you, oh yeah, it's done differently here, daytime, afternoon, or night shift. Right. I'd break it into groups then. Thank you very much. Stratification looks like this. Data are just bouncing back and forth, up and down. And if you look at the characteristics, the mean is here, but half the data are here, half the data are here. Nobody is at the mean. That is a classic stratification problem. That's why using aggregated data and summary statistics like the mean tell you very little. Matter of fact, if somebody gives you the mean, the average, but doesn't tell you the min, the max, the standard deviation, you ought to run the other way because they either don't know what they're talking about or they're trying to convince you without giving you full information. The mean can be very misleading. Let's look at another one. This was actually data from a hospital where I worked. What do you think this might be? It was a major issue with stratification. Thank you. Weekends, precisely. Thanks, Richard. So we have the mean, it's skewed toward the high end, but we have weekday and weekend. It should be cracked apart. You should make two charts. This is what we call confounding. You've muddled up the data because you didn't crack it apart. Next comes thinking of the levels. And so now the question is, as you do your own work, what levels of stratification are appropriate for your work? These are some of the classics that we typically use. And today, with a focus on equity and diversity, status related to where you live, urban, rural, ethnicity, cultural background, do you speak English? All of those types of things enter into our work as we're starting to think about equity and diversity. Once you have thought about what you need to collect and the categories, now it's time to think about sampling. How many of you even knew that there were two major buckets, probability and non-probability sampling? Now, how many of you go further to say that you can tell me the advantages, disadvantages, and when to use each of these sampling methods? And if you can't, you need to do a little soaking time with sampling methods. And any good old stat book, going back to the 50s and the 60s, will give you this stuff. In the books that I've written, I have dedicated a whole section just to explaining these, and I'm posting a table that shows you each method, the advantages, disadvantages, and when to use it underneath each one of these. And again, sampling, it's not a statistical issue. It's a logic and practical issue. And so if you don't have a whole lot of experience with sampling, this is another time to spend time with Ruth, Debbie, Tim, and thinking about when to use sampling, when not to use it, and how to go about it. Frequency and duration are simple. That is, how often do I need to dip into that stream of data as it's cursing in front of me? And then how long? Am I going to take a sample every day, every hour, once a week? And then will we do it for a month and a half, 20 days? Frequency and duration, it all relates to how often do you get it and for how long. Now, as we think about this, and you think about all that we do in healthcare, go back to my point about the ICU. The criticality of your need to know information should drive your data collection. So when we're first starting out with projects, like I've done projects on flow in the A&E, we collect data by hour to see how the flow into the A&E is occurring. If you just wait once a week, you're not going to gain knowledge. Even once a day could be a little dicey. So the criticality of your need to know should actually guide how often you collect data and for how long. All right. Now, I put together a data collection sheet. And again, it's a simple thing. A few more columns, but it covers everything I've just summarized: stratification, sampling, frequency, and duration. And again, it's not that complicated, but it requires thinking. Probably more thinking than doing. And so as you put all these pieces together, it starts with the organizing your measures. Then you have an op-def worksheet for each one of them, explain the details. You have your data collection plan, and voila, that leads to a measurement system that works. All right. So again, you have people within your system who have been with us for over a year in our Improvement Advisor program, who have been well steeped in these concepts, methods, and tools. So if you're not familiar with those folks, you need to have them become some of your new best friends on your texting list and how to get a hold of them quickly, because they can help you. And I too am always available because I support the work of your organization. All right, so now we move on to thinking about the final bit. That is analysis. What are you going to do with the data so that you can take proper action? Well, Deming had a simple charge. First, he'd say, understand the variation in the system and then take steps to reduce it. The problem is that in healthcare, we have spent an inordinate amount of time teaching people how to use aggregated data and summary statistics to try to make sense of data. And if you use these enumerative, summary, descriptive statistics, you will never be able to improve anything because they are usually at fixed points in time that are not giving you any sense of the variation over time. So think of it this way. If you had an average of 65, doesn't matter what it is, how could you get that average of 65? Well, the data could look like this, like this, like this, like this, or like this. Which one do you want? And you'd say, well, it all depends. If it was patient satisfaction, ooh, I like the red line. If it was wait time, ooh, I like the purple line. If I wanted to show that our project of wait time in A&E worked, here was the first baseline, the black line up here. Then look, it dropped and now we're here. I like that line. But they all have the same average. I have data sets that show the max, the min, and even the standard deviation, and the Pearson correlation coefficient for the data sets are all exactly the same. Descriptive summary statistics. And so you need to be able to think about how you're going to connect your process to an EKG to understand the variation that truly lives in the process. The other thing is that many organizations, leaders, boards, love red, yellow, green graphics, or as you know them, love them, RAG reports. They are the bane of my existence as an improvement specialist. Matter of fact, colleagues and I teach courses at the IHI Forum entitled, Please, No More Red, Yellow, Green Graphics. Now let's think about why this is a problem, because no matter what country I'm in the world, leaders love this stuff. And they do all kind of strange things with it. They put diamond ratings. I've seen ones with smiley faces in them. I saw one group, they used apples. And they had, because an apple a day keeps the doctor away, old expression. Well, they'd give you whole apples if you were doing well, and then an apple with a bite out of it if you got a half an apple. I was like, oh my, this is absurd. All it does is lead to data for judgment. So let's think of this. Let's take our first thing, safety events per 10,000 adjusted patient days. They got, ooh, red bad, ooh, green, cake day, let's all celebrate. Well, as you look at these data, there's no learning here. Why? Because the cut points from red, yellow, green are usually arbitrary and somebody comes up with them. And they're usually whole numbers divisible by 5, which makes no sense at all. So as you look at this, let's lay the data out over time. We have the first target. We have the first red dot, bad data. We have the second bad data. And then we have, ooh, green data, whoopee. Look how happy that makes us. Now, again, we have a second target that everything's supposed to be below that. And again, just like my CAUTI data, what is the capability of this process? It has no chance of ever achieving the green target, let alone the purple. And if you put the data quickly on a control chart, you would discern that immediately. 5 seconds, I can give you an answer. The red, yellow, green, people get into debating. Let's look at the second one. Percent of patients getting the good best care bundle. So we got a bad, yellow, kind of close. That was almost there, and another red. Here's the data. The direction of goodness is up. They had a baseline. Did something, doesn't matter what it was. Right now, they moved up. And then you see now they're in a new transition area. These little dots here were the transition point, and now look where they are. They're up here. And if we just put a circle around that, we'd see that they're doing extremely well. But bad data, because there's the target, 95%, another whole number divisible by 5 makes no sense. Bad data, kind of, well, look, they're close to that green line. We'll give them a yellow. They're almost there. They don't get cake, but they go, way to go. Congrats, you're almost there. And then another red. Definitely, I'm glad we didn't reward those people. When in fact, this is extremely good news. Deming always said that the control chart is a way to protect the morale of the workers. This is good news. The red, yellow, green graph demoralizes the workers because look at the progress they've made. So I would suggest that as you think about these things, it's time to move away from a rear view, mirror view. Myron Tribus is a well-known statistician, and he said this: managing a company by the means of monthly, quarterly, annual data is like trying to drive your car by looking through the rear view mirror. You're looking to where you've been, not to where you want to go. And it's also very dangerous. And I would say it's the same dangerous notion that a group does when they start looking at data from last quarter compared to the previous quarter, average last year. It's rubbish. All it does is lead you to data for judgment. So what you need to be able to do is think about gathering data as close to the production of work as possible. That lies at the heart and soul of what quality improvement's about. And if you don't understand variation, these are the things you will do. And we see these repeatedly done in healthcare organizations around the world when leaders, managers don't understand variation conceptually or statistically. And if you've been in healthcare long enough, you may have seen this last point. I worked for the Hospital Association of Pennsylvania for 10 years and the American Hospital Association. When I did research on some of our Medicare and Medicaid programs, I was taken to court 5 times by hospitals that didn't like how the model gave them the money. Big urban hospitals in Pennsylvania where I worked thought they should get all the money, Pittsburgh and Philadelphia. Pennsylvania is the largest rural state in America. And as a result, a majority of the patients are in small towns and rural settings. And so I developed a model that was equitably distributing the money. We have somebody who probably needs to go on mute.
Yes.
Thank you. And so people, if they don't see the results of the data they like, in fact, will do strange things. This summarizes what you may experience. Deming had what he called the cycle of fear, where there's increased fear because the numbers aren't correct. That fear leads to kill the messenger, which leads to filtering the information, which leads to micromanaging. And if you'll remember back to the Bristol inquiry, way back in England, it was one of the conditions that started people thinking about this cycle of fear, of when the data don't represent what somebody, usually higher up in the food chain, wants to see. This gentleman, Walter Schuhart, provided an option. He said that I can't predict the next data point. Nobody can, but I can predict within statistical limits where the data will go in the future and help people understand it. What he said is if you take data in that static distribution and you lay it on its side and you imagine there's a little string at the top of that distribution, and when you extract the data, you lay it all out in time order. And that time order allows us to think about what Schuhart originally called controlled and uncontrolled variation, or today it's known as common cause and special cause. These two things lie at the very heart and soul of understanding quality improvement data. Common cause, stable, predictable, just part of the variation. Your morning commute. You say, how long does it take you to get to work? About 50 minutes. How high could it go? Maybe 70 or down to 45. Well, then what happens if you take the tube? What happens if the tube line is shut down that you normally travel? You are now moved from a common cause to a special cause. Due to irregular, unnatural events, affects my line, but it doesn't affect Tim's line. So Tim shows up on time, I'm stuck. Results in an unstable, unpredictable process. This is also known as non-random. So these two concepts lie at the very heart of being able to understand variation conceptually. And again, Tim, Ruth, Debbie, and the team can help you understand these. Here's my quick test. Couple pumpkins. Do you think these look like common cause or special cause? Don't think about it too hard. They're pumpkins. Common cause or special cause? Are they more or less alike or different? Common cause, exactly. Thank you very much. Now, what about this bad boy? Common cause or special? All right, special. I have done this for years, and you can see I got this from a friend, Richard Lendon, and the NHS years. This is probably going back 20 years. When he was in my class, he sent this to me then. Well, I've used this for years. Nobody ever gets it right because these are the special causes. Why? Because I have taken a static picture. This is like the comparison of two columns of data or the average at a single point in time. If I took a camera and spanned this parking lot, you would see this is a competition of large pumpkins and squashes. These were the special causes because they don't fit the criteria of the operational definition of what's here. This is common cause. These are the special cause. But because I gave you a snapshot at a fixed point in time, you were misled. So as you think about common cause, you're always going to have up and down, back and forth. You're going to have high points and low points. If I smooshed all this together, you'd end up with basically your bell curve, a little in the tails with the bulk in the middle. When you have special causes, it's two categories. One, unintentional. Stuff happens that you hadn't planned for. A bad storm, a power outage. The elevator company comes and wipes out 3 banks of elevators to work on them, and now patients can't get moved to test. Food trays can't be delivered. It hadn't been planned. What you're trying to do is planned special cause. That is, you have a baseline, you had an intervention, and then the data shifted to the direction of goodness. You're trying to create a special cause. So what you've got to realize is that common cause is not good, special cause is not bad. Look at my example of blood pressure here. You could have stable, predictable blood pressure in a patient that is what? Unacceptable, because it's out of specification. You could make the same argument for hemoglobin A1Cs, hematocrits, neutrophils, BUN, creatinine levels. There's stable, predictable ranges that we look at, particularly for physiological measures. And then there's stuff that's, whoa, out of whack. Common cause is not good, special cause is not bad. What you need to be able to do is answer 2 questions. Does the process reflect random common cause variation? If it's so, it's stable and therefore predictable. If it is predictable, the question is it capable? And I go back to my original point with the CAUTI. If your process is stable and predictable, but far from target, it is not capable. And when we have a whole statistical bag of tricks that we use to determine process capability statistically. But basically, I showed you with the CAUTI, you look at the mean, you look at the upper and lower limits, and you look at where the target is. And in a blink of an eye, we can decide if the process needs to have kept the same way of working, but just reduce variation, or fundamentally scrap the process and redesign it. It all relates to process capability. You can only tell that by looking at data over time. Finally, I'd say, look at examples that fit your discipline. I was doing a program for Sutter Healthcare in California, and I had a trauma surgeon from the ER in the class. And I was explaining common and special cause. And he goes, I got it. And he was kind of like Hermione in Harry Potter. You know, she'd always go, ooh, 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 I got the answer. He was just like Hermione. And he goes, I got it. And I said, what you got? And he goes, I know how to explain this to my colleagues. So it was time for a coffee break. And he and I worked on this. And he brought this up. And he goes, common cause, it's like a normal sinus rhythm. Special cause is like fibrillation, right? It's ventricular fib. He says it's unstable, unpredictable. It's not desirable. He goes, I can now explain this. So what you need to do is you need to be able to get examples that work in your discipline, and they are everywhere. And when you do that, it'll make the application a little easier. Finally, think about the leaders that you work with every day. How do they explain variation? Using red, yellow, green, last time period, this time period? They probably don't care about p-values. They probably care about percent change maybe, or just red, yellow, green, better, worse. How do they analyze it? Do they use common cause, special cause? And if they don't, what methods did they use to interpret data? This is a serious dialogue that we at IHI have with leaders. And we're coming this week with our site visit that will be a part of that discussion. How do you interpret data? Do you use common special cause terminology and concepts? And if not, how do you make decisions? It's critical to the success of an organization. Final thing, we'll wrap up on this. How do you understand variation statistically? As I showed you with my pumpkins, if you take a static view, you're going to have limited capability to understand variation. You really need to have a dynamic view of looking at data over time. With a movie equivalent, plotting data in time sequence is the minimum requirement for quality improvement work. And it can start with a line graph, move to a run chart, a Shewhart control chart, but it's always looking at data in time series. It's allowing us to understand the variation over time. And there's three basic uses. One, to make the process visible, which you cannot do with static comparative data. Two, to determine if the change that we made after baseline actually moved us in the direction of goodness. And then finally, are we able, through quality control principles, to put in a stable, predictable process that continues over time? Or did it drift back to its old state of affairs? Those are the three primary uses. And we have a couple tools. The run chart is a blunt instrument. It's like an X-ray. It's a plotted data over time. Time is always on the horizontal axis. Patients in chronological order. Monday, Tuesday, Wednesday, week 1, week 2, etc. We plot the dots. The measure is always on the vertical. And then we put the median, the 50th percentile, as the center line. And then we apply 4 run chart rules that will allow us to decide, does it show that common cause or special cause? The more powerful tools are control charts, otherwise classically known as Shewhart charts, named after Dr. Walter Shewhart, who started making these things and explaining management back in the 1920s and 30s at Western Electric. And here, similar layout, time, the measure, plot the dots. Now we have the upper and lower control limits, known as sigma limits. And for those of you who have statistical background, note, this is an important note, they are not standard deviations. They are sigma limits. They are different calculations to get the upper and lower limits than what you use to calculate the standard deviation. We put the mean, the mathematical average, as the center line. We have zones, which are these lighter areas. And then we have a series of tests that are more rigorous to define common cause and special cause. And so as you learn from your colleagues in the quality department, they'll talk about the y-axis on both types of charts being the observation. the measure, the metric, whatever you want to call it. And the horizontal is called the subgroup. It's how you've organized the data. Individual patients coming to clinic, Monday, Tuesday, Wednesday, it's always time ordered, okay? Now, your challenge, as described by my little buddy playing chess in the park, is to gain more knowledge about run and Shewhart charts. The issue here is that there's essentially one way to make a run chart. And I just explained it. Plot the dots, put the median, use the 4 simple run chart rules. There are many, many control charts. There are probably right now, when you look at manufacturing, agriculture, other industries in healthcare, there are probably 35 to 40 control chart types. These are the 5 that Tim, Ruth, Debbie, the quality folks have spent a year with me studying. How to use these, when to use them. Each type of your data requires a different chart. There's a chart for percentages, a P chart. There's a chart for rates, like the CODI rate, a U chart. A C chart is for merely counting the number of defects, errors, slips, mistakes. XMR chart and X bar S are for what we call variables data, true measurement data, time, weight, blood pressure, money. The blue charts are what are referred to as attributes charts. They're characteristics, and it's either defects, defectives, or percentages. And that's why you need a little deeper dive in understanding control charts. But you've got experts within your ranks now who are skilled in those topics and will help you decide which chart. Again, it goes back to your measurement plan. Did you collect variables data, which is more powerful than attributes? Attributes data, a percent. It's a binomial. You're alive, you're dead. There's no degree. It's just one bucket or another. Here we have degrees, decimals, fractions. And once you have decided what type of data you have, then you can use my ever popular control chart decision tree to decide which chart. And you see, it depends on the type of data, how much data, and then boom, you end up with having the correct chart. Now, you can make run charts by hand. I've made them on napkins at nursing stations. When you get to these, you need software. And the quality team has software, but it requires, again, this machine before you start using the keyboard machine. You have to have knowledge. All right? So the 5th and final question, and we'll wrap up on this, is how well do you link your data to improvement? Data without a context for action are useless. And they typically lead people to data for judgment. So go back to your measurement assessment. You may want to revisit, see if after hearing this presentation, maybe you need to revise some of what you thought you knew about some of these things. Then you need to think about, and again, it is a simple improvement plan. These are the steps that we help teams as they prepare for their quality improvement journey. SPC methods, run chart, control chart, planned experimentation, help you with questions 2 and 4. You need to figure out, going back to that flow chart I started with, the yellow boxes, what you do with your team, which are questions 1 and 3. You also need to think about how this progresses. Now, if done correctly, this is what it would look like. You get data at baseline. Again, remember, without data, you're just a person with another opinion. So show me the data. What's the baseline? Why is this an important topic? You extend that, or what we call freeze the limits, extend them into the future. Then you're going to apply your change ideas. And you may have a transition period, as we see here with the first blue dots, but then you notice that you did move in the direction of goodness. What do we do then? We've identified a special cause relative to the baseline. We now see that we've had demonstrable improvement. We put new control limits and center line, we extend them, and now we continue to plot to see if we're able to hold the gains. And then we put that into the future with quality control principles to make sure that it is the new way that we do work. All right. And I want to give credit to Mr. Forum Alam at East London. I've worked at East London this marks the 10th year working at East London Foundation Trust. And Forum is one of the data analysts, senior data analyst there. He's marvelous with the charts, and also he made this graphic. It is a marvelous demonstration of what you're trying to achieve over time. So in wrapping up, you've got to realize the charts don't tell you the answers. I get people that, well, what should I do? I go, what do you think you should do? What's your theory? What's your prediction? The charts, just like all of our analytics for patient care, are there to help us. They don't give us the answer. We have to think through with our theories, our predictions, and understand the sequence of improvement. Starting with your theories, building ideas, testing them under different conditions, making it part of routine when you're ready to implement, making sure that you engage in scale up for implementation, and finally spread. And this is the journey you're on. Many of you have worked down here on these initial steps. Some of you are getting ready to maybe implement some changes. There have been a few things that we've spread within CUH, and yet this is where the learning occurs. And you're going to do PDSAs and data collection throughout that journey. So there is additional resources for you. I've made over 20 whiteboard videos that explain the science of improvement that are meant for teams to understand the tools, concepts, and methods. I have 3 longer videos for teams that are going to spend a little more soaking time on topics. I've also written 3 books that have been translated into different languages actually now. And these are ones we use in our teaching and can help explain some of the details a little more thoroughly. I've also put in appendices, and particularly you may want to pay attention to Appendix D. How will I know when? And I've had people say, when can I stop measuring? When do I have to do that? When? So there's my answers to how do I know when, that you can sip on your favorite beverage and cogitate those answers a little bit further. So I started with the good Dr. Deming. I'll end with him, because when people would ask him, well, who's responsible for quality? Now, one of the standard answers was, well, everybody. But Deming was very clear that an organization that doesn't have commitment to make quality the organizational strategy from top management will flounder. And it becomes a hobby, not a way of life. So I'll leave you with that final thought. And again, if there's any conclusions, questions, issues, you know how to get a hold of me. My info is in the notes, and Tim, Ruth, and the team know how to get in hold of me. So let me just stop. We're at time, but as you looked at the chat, Ruth, Tim, are there anything that you want to bring up or any highlights that you want to make before we give people back their Friday afternoon?
So Bob, just thank you so much. You really do make this subject so much clearer. Having read some of the textbooks, and then when I listen, I can really understand it. And then also trying to apply it within the organization bit by bit. And I've really enjoyed looking at my data and watching it over time and then going, the change is actually happening. My idea worked or it didn't work. And so you can really look at where you are and analyze and know if you're going in the right direction or not. So thank you so much. And I think that will hopefully give us a bit of a kickstart in our journey towards interpreting our data using data for improvement, which is new for a lot of us.
Yeah, well, it's my pleasure and honor. I've had the pleasure of working with Ruth and Tim, the other Tim, Debbie, for a couple years now. And the only regret I have is that we were going to do this session in person as an all-day session, but just travel-wise and financially, that didn't work out for us. But I do look forward to spending more time with you, either in this format or in person. And if any of you have any questions, they know how to get a hold of me. And I'd be glad to have other sessions too. We could have another session on control charts, just on control charts, or planned experimentation, experimental, quasi-experimental design. So as you, as faculty, build your skills and knowledge, just keep me posted, and I'll be meeting with the team to evaluate how this went for you.
Yeah.
Thank you very much. Have a good weekend.
Yeah.
See you later.
Thank you.
Thank you, Bob.
Bye-bye.
Bye, everyone.
Thank you very much. Bye.